Do you have any idea what you've done?" The shout ripped through the marble hallway like thunder. Crystal glasses trembled. A tray nearly slipped from Ruth Daniels' shaking hands. In front of her stood Richard Hale, the billionaire who owned everything except peace. And in that moment, he made sure everyone remembered their place. "You're paid to clean floors, not think," he snapped. But what Richard Hale didn't know was that the woman he just humiliated was about to uncover the one truth his fortune couldn't hide. A secret drawn in crayon by the daughter he thought he'd lost forever. Because sometimes, the people we silence end up being the only ones who truly listen. This is Hidden Black Echoes, where the stories of struggles are told, the rise and the voice of those the world tried to silence. If you believe kindness should never depend on paychecks or power, tap like and subscribe. Because in the next few minutes, you'll see how one quiet act of courage will challenge pride, uncover truth, and heal a heart money could never reach. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Richard Hale's voice thundered across the marble hallway, echoing through the mansion like a storm. Ruth Daniels froze where she stood, her hands trembling around the silver tray she'd been carrying. The glass of water rattled, barely clinging to the edge. "I told you," Richard shouted. "No one, and I mean no one, goes into my daughter's room without my permission." Ruth swallowed hard, keeping her head bowed. "Sir, I only went in because I heard crying." "I thought." "You thought?" His voice dripped with disdain. "You're paid to clean floors, not think." For a moment, silence filled the vast hallway. The grand chandelier above them swayed gently from the echo of his rage. Ruth's eyes lifted just enough to see the man standing before her, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in an immaculate black suit. His face, sharp and proud, was carved with years of power and arrogance. But behind that cold stare, she saw something else. Fear. He wasn't just angry, he was scared. "I told every staff member not to disturb her," he said, his tone lowering, controlled but venomous. "My daughter doesn't need your pity. She needs discipline." Ruth wanted to speak, to tell him the truth about what she saw, but the words caught in her throat. Because when she'd opened that door, she hadn't seen a spoiled rich girl. She'd seen a broken child. It had been her second week working in the Hale mansion, a job she'd taken after months of searching. The pay was good, the house enormous, but the atmosphere was heavy, like the walls themselves were grieving something unspoken. Every room gleamed with perfection, but it all felt lifeless. No laughter, no warmth, just polished silence. The other staff whispered about Emily Hale, the billionaire's only child. "She doesn't talk," one of the cooks murmured. "Not a single word in 2 years, not since her mother's accident." Ruth remembered feeling a pang in her chest when she first saw the little girl, sitting by the window in a pale blue dress, her hair neatly brushed, her gaze fixed on nothing. She looked like a doll, beautiful, fragile, and heartbreakingly quiet. Every day Ruth passed by her door, hearing faint sounds, the scratch of pencils, the shuffle of paper. But no words, until that afternoon. The crying had been soft, the kind of sound you almost miss if you're not listening to it. But Ruth always listened. When she pushed the door open, she found Emily sitting on the floor surrounded by sheets of paper. Crayons scattered around her. Her tiny hands were shaking as she drew furiously. Lines, colors, shapes that didn't make sense at first. Then Ruth saw the drawings clearly. A big house, a car, a stick figure woman with long hair, lying beside a lake. Emily's eyes were red. She didn't look up. She just kept drawing. Ruth's instincts took over. She knelt down slowly and whispered, "Sweetheart, are you okay?" No response. Just more scribbling. Faster this time, more chaotic. When Ruth reached to gently pick up one of the papers, Emily's hand shot out, clutching it to her chest. That was when Richard Hale appeared at the door. Fury in his eyes, voice like a whip. "What are you doing here?" Now standing in the hallway, the memory burned behind Ruth's eyes. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quietly. She was upset. "I just wanted to help." Richard exhaled sharply through his nose, straightening his tie. "You're not here to help. You're here to clean. Stay in your place, Miss Daniels, and stay out of her room." He turned to leave, but Ruth spoke, just once, softly. "Sir, your daughter's not just silent. She's hurting." Richard froze mid-step, his jaw tightening. For a split second, something flickered in his expression. Pain, maybe, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "Do your job, Ms. Daniels," he said coldly. "Leave the rest to professionals." He walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hall until only silence remained. Ruth stood there, her heart pounding, shame burning her throat. She wanted to cry, not because of his words, but because of the look in that little girl's eyes. It wasn't the look of defiance. It was fear. Later that evening, as she cleared the dining room, Ruth noticed something on the edge of the silver tray, a folded piece of paper. It wasn't there before. She opened it carefully. Inside was a crayon drawing, 2 stick figures, one tall, one short, standing side by side under a sun. Between them, a small red heart, and under it, a single word written in uneven letters. Friend. Ruth stared at it, her breath catching in her chest. Emily had left it for her, and even though no one else in the house could hear the little girl's voice, Ruth knew she was speaking, in her own way. The next morning, Ruth tucked the folded drawing inside her apron pocket before she began her rounds. It felt almost sacred, a secret message only she and the little girl understood. No one else in this house seemed to listen the way Emily drew. Everywhere she went, the staff whispered. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Grayson, eyed Ruth coldly. "Word of advice," she said while polishing the silver. "Don't get attached. Mr. Hale doesn't like it when the help crosses the line. He's fired 3 nannies already." Ruth nodded, but said nothing. She'd learned long ago that kindness didn't require permission. By noon she carried fresh linens upstairs. Emily's door was slightly open. Inside, sunlight poured across the carpet, scattering over piles of crayons and blank paper. Emily sat cross-legged in the middle of it all, silently sketching another world. Ruth hesitated at the threshold. Then she gently knocked. "May I come in, sweetheart?" Emily didn't answer. But she didn't look away either. Ruth stepped inside, quiet as a breath, and began folding linens on the chair near the window. Every few seconds, she hummed softly, the same tune her mother used to sing while shelling peas on their porch in Georgia. The little girl's crayon slowed, her head tilted slightly, listening. Then, for the first time, Emily slid one of her papers across the floor toward Ruth. It showed a house surrounded by tall flowers. In the center, 2 figures, a big one with dark hair, a small one with blonde pigtails. Underneath, shaky letters spelled garden. Ruth smiled gently. "It's beautiful. Do you like flowers?" Emily's hand hovered, then she nodded, barely. That nod was tiny, but it was everything. Over the next few days, a quiet routine began. While the rest of the staff hurried through chores, Ruth would linger near the art room at the same hour, dusting shelves that were already clean. She'd hum. Emily would draw. Sometimes she'd slide a picture across the floor, sometimes not. They never spoke. They didn't need to. Each drawing was its own kind of conversation. The language of a child who'd forgotten what safety felt like. One afternoon, Ruth noticed Emily trying to reach for a blue crayon that had rolled under the couch. Ruth knelt down, retrieved it, and handed it over with a smile. "Blue's my favorite too," she whispered. "Sky color, hope color." Emily blinked, then scribbled a quick swirl of blue across the paper, and looked up. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Still, for the first time she was trying. Word of Ruth's visits spread fast. At dinner service that night, Mrs. Grayson cornered her in the pantry. "You're getting too close," she hissed. "He'll notice." Ruth wiped her hands on a towel. "If caring for a child is wrong, I'll take my chances." The housekeeper shook her head. "You don't understand these people. They see compassion as weakness." But Ruth had cleaned enough mansions in her life to know, the richer the walls, the louder the silence inside them. And no amount of money could buy back a child's voice. A week later, rain lashed the windows. The mansion's halls felt darker, emptier. Ruth carried tea upstairs, pausing outside Emily's door. She heard faint humming, not from herself this time, but from inside. She opened the door softly. Emily was on the rug, crayons scattered, sketching something different. A woman in a yellow dress standing beside a lake. Thunder rumbled outside. Emily flinched, pressing her hands to her ears. Ruth hurried forward and sat beside her. "It's just the rain, baby. It can't hurt you." Emily's breathing slowed. She pointed at the drawing, the woman by the water, and tapped her finger twice on the page. Ruth followed the motion, confused. "That's your mommy, isn't it?" Emily's eyes filled. She nodded once, tears spilling quietly down her cheeks. Then she drew a small figure at the edge of the water, herself, and a blue shape in the lake. Ruth's chest tightened. She reached for a tissue, dabbed the girl's tears, and whispered, "You don't have to be afraid. I see it. I see you." For a long moment, they just sat together, listening to the storm. Later that night, Ruth returned to her small servant's room. She unfolded the drawings Emily had slipped under her door throughout the week. The garden, the blue sky, the lake, the woman in yellow. Each piece fit together like fragments of a puzzle she hadn't yet solved. Then she noticed something on the newest one. A faint mark in the corner, almost erased. A tiny red heart, drawn next to a small stick figure with dark skin. Ruth touched it lightly. "She drew me," she whispered. Outside, the storm finally quieted. And somewhere down the hall, the sound of gentle humming returned. Emily's voice, still wordless but alive again. Ruth closed her eyes, smiling through tears. For the first time since she'd entered that cold mansion, she felt hope blooming in its halls. Because the girl who wouldn't speak was finally starting to be heard. The Hale mansion woke each morning to quiet perfection. Curtains opened automatically. Lights glowed on cue. The staff moved like clockwork. But that morning, something changed. Because Ruth's gentle rhythm, her quiet hums and soft footsteps near Emily's door, had not gone unnoticed. If you're still watching, you can feel that moment when walls built on pride start to crack. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever seen truth slip through silence, because what happens next will prove that compassion sees deeper than control ever could. Richard Hale stood at the top of the staircase, arms crossed, watching. His gaze was hard, cold, calculating, the look of a man who built empires and crushed distractions. He waited until Ruth turned down the corridor carrying fresh linens before calling out sharply, "Ms. Daniels." The sound of his voice made her stop instantly. "Sir?" she asked, clutching the folded sheets. "Come to my office," he said. Now. The office was a monument to power. Glass walls, leather chairs, a wall of framed business awards. Yet somehow it felt smaller when Ruth stepped inside. Richard closed the door behind her. "Sit." Ruth obeyed, folding her hands in her lap. He leaned forward. "I've noticed you spending a lot of time near my daughter's room." Ruth tried to steady her voice. "Yes, sir. Did I not give clear instructions?" His tone sliced through her words. "No one interferes with her therapy schedule. No one." Ruth looked up, meeting his eyes with quiet courage. "With respect, sir, your daughter isn't responding to the doctors. She doesn't need more professionals. She needs someone to listen." Richard's jaw tightened. "You think you understand my child better than I do?" Ruth hesitated. "No, sir. But I understand the pain. And I know what it looks like when someone's carrying too much of it alone." That line hit him. She saw it in the way his eyes flickered away for half a second before he masked it again. He exhaled sharply, pushing away from his desk. "You are here to clean, not to psychoanalyze my family. Stay out of her room, Miss Daniels. This is your final warning." He turned his back, signaling the conversation was over. But as Ruth stood, her voice trembled, not from fear, but from conviction. "Sir, your daughter isn't broken. She's calling for help. You just can't hear her." Richard's silence filled the room like thunder. Then, without turning, he said coldly, "Get out." Ruth left, her heart pounding. That night the mansion felt heavier than ever. Dinner passed in silence. Emily didn't come downstairs. Ruth lingered in the kitchen, wiping the same counter over and over just to stay near the hallway that led to the girls' room. Mrs. Grayson walked by, muttering under her breath. "He's watching you." "Don't be foolish." But Ruth couldn't sleep. Something about those drawings haunted her. The patterns, the images, the same lake appearing again and again. When midnight came and the mansion went still, Ruth rose from her narrow bed and slipped into the corridor. Barefoot, careful, silent. She pushed open the art room door. The faint scent of crayons and paper greeted her. Stacks of drawings covered the small desk, neatly arranged by Emily's careful little hands. Ruth gathered them one by one, spreading them across the rug in a wide circle. And slowly, painfully, a story began to unfold. There was the big house again. Then a car, drawn with frantic, jagged lines, a woman standing near water. Then the car, sinking. And in the corner of that same page, a tiny girl crying beside a teddy bear. Ruth pressed a hand to her mouth. The story was clear now. Emily had seen what no child should ever see. The drawings weren't random, they were memories. Just then, a soft sound made her freeze. The door creaked open. Emily stood there in her pajamas, clutching the same teddy bear from the drawings. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. One child, one woman, both carrying secrets too heavy for words. Ruth whispered, "Sweetheart, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have gone through your pictures. But I understand them now. Emily didn't move. She just pointed at the paper showing the car by the lake. Then at herself. Her lip quivered. A silent tear slid down her cheek. Ruth knelt, her own eyes wet. You were there, weren't you? Emily nodded once, small but certain. Ruth reached forward and wrapped her arms around the trembling child. Emily didn't pull away this time. It was the first embrace she'd allowed anyone in years. I promise, baby, Ruth whispered, her voice breaking. You don't have to keep it inside anymore. I'll help you tell him. The next morning, Ruth returned to work as if nothing had happened. But something inside her had changed. She carried the truth now, one she couldn't unsee. And though she knew Richard Hale might fire her for defying him again, she also knew she couldn't walk away from that little girl. Not now. Not after she'd finally been heard. By evening, the air inside the mansion felt charged, like the quiet before a storm. Richard had received a call from Emily's therapist, reporting unusual emotional changes. He dismissed it, but Ruth could tell his mind was turning. When she passed him in the hallway, he gave her a long, suspicious look. She didn't flinch. Because while Richard Hale guarded his silence with pride, his daughter was breaking hers with crayons, and Ruth Daniels, against his orders, was the only one brave enough to listen. Ruth couldn't sleep that night. The drawings haunted her, especially the one with the lake. Every detail replayed in her mind like a story begging to be told. By dawn, she made her choice. She gathered the sketches, wrapped them gently in a dish towel, and walked straight to Richard Hale's office. Her hands trembled, but her eyes were steady. He looked up from his desk, irritation already brewing. Ms. Daniels, I thought I was clear. Ruth cut him off, voice shaking but firm. Sir, please. Just look at these. She laid the papers in front of him, one by one. The car, the woman, the lake, the crying child. Richard frowned, clearly impatient. They're drawings, Ms. Daniels. Children draw nonsense all the time. No, Ruth whispered. These aren't make-believe. They're memories. She pointed to the sequence. Your wife's car accident happened by a lake, didn't it? Richard froze. His face went pale. How do you know that? Because she saw it, Ruth said softly. Emily was there. She saw everything. He pushed back from the desk, shaking his head. That's impossible. She was asleep. I made sure she... He stopped mid-sentence, his voice cracking. Ruth stepped closer. She watched it happen. Every time she closes her eyes, she sees it again. That's why she stopped speaking, because no one believed what she saw. Richard's breath hitched. For years he had buried the guilt, convincing himself his daughter's silence was grief, not trauma. But now, the truth stood in front of him, drawn in crayon and pain. He sank into his chair, staring at the pictures as if seeing them for the first time. Tears welled in his eyes, something no one in that mansion had ever seen. I thought I was protecting her, he murmured. I told her it wasn't her fault, but she never heard me. I never... His voice broke completely. Ruth's tone softened. It's not too late, sir. She doesn't need another doctor. She needs you. He looked up at her, the weight of realization finally breaking his pride. What do I do? He whispered. Go to her, Ruth said simply. Let her see that you finally understand. For the first time since she'd met him, Richard Hale didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a father, scared, broken, and ready to make things right. As Ruth quietly left the room, he stayed frozen behind the desk, staring at his daughter's small, hand-drawn world, the one that had been speaking to him all along. And for the first time in years, Richard Hale listened. The house was silent that morning, not the usual cold silence, but something tense, waiting. Ruth could feel it as she wiped down the counters. Every footstep sounded louder. Every ticking clock echoed. She knew Richard Hale hadn't slept. He'd sat in his office long after sunrise, surrounded by his daughter's drawings. Pages of crayon and paper that spoke louder than any doctor ever could. When he finally rose from his chair, he didn't put on his jacket. He didn't straighten his tie. He just walked, quietly, uncertainly, toward Emily's room. Ruth followed at a distance, staying hidden in the hallway. Richard paused at the door for a long moment. His hand hovered over the doorknob as if it weighed 100 pounds. Then he took a breath and stepped inside. Emily sat on the floor, as she always did, a circle of drawings around her like a fortress. Her teddy bear leaned against her leg. When she saw her father, she froze. He knelt down slowly, keeping his voice soft. "Emily, sweetheart," his words trembled. "I know you don't want to talk to me. And maybe I deserve that. But I need you to know something." She watched him cautiously, eyes wide, lips pressed tight. Richard picked up one of the drawings, the one by the lake. His hand shook. "I didn't understand, baby. I didn't know you were there that night. I thought I was protecting you by pretending it didn't happen." He swallowed hard, his voice cracking. "But I see it now. You were trying to tell me. You've been telling me all along." Emily's eyes glistened, her small fingers curled around the teddy bear. "I miss her too," Richard whispered. "Every day. But I shouldn't have made you carry that pain alone." A single tear rolled down his cheek. It fell onto the paper, smudging a line of blue crayon. Emily blinked at the tear, staring at it, as if something inside her broke loose. Her tiny voice trembled out, raw and uncertain. "Mommy!" Richard gasped. His head jerked up, eyes wide. "Emily!" Her lips quivered again, barely moving. "Mommy, gone." It was no louder than a whisper, but it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. He reached for her, pulling her into his arms, holding her so tight it was as if he was afraid she'd disappear. "It's okay, baby. You can talk, you can cry. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time in 2 years, the mansion wasn't silent anymore. It was filled with sobs, small, real, human, the kind that heal more than they hurt. Outside the door, Ruth pressed a hand to her chest. Tears blurred her vision, but she smiled, the kind of smile that carried both relief and quiet pride. She had promised Emily that she would help her tell her story. Now she has. Later that afternoon, the mansion felt different. Warm light filled the halls where cold air once lingered. The staff whispered in disbelief. They had heard the girl's voice echo down the corridor. In the kitchen, Ruth stood by the window polishing silver when Richard appeared. For once his expression wasn't stern or distant. He looked humble. He approached her slowly. "Miss Daniels," he said, voice low, "I owe you an apology." Ruth set the cloth down, turning to him quietly. "You saw what I refused to see," he continued. "You listened when I didn't. I can never repay that." Ruth smiled faintly. "You don't have to, sir. Just keep listening to her. That's all she needs." He nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "Would you stay?" not as staff, but as family. Ruth hesitated, surprised by the offer. But then she thought of Emily's shy smile, the way her voice had cracked through the silence. She nodded softly. I'll stay as long as she needs me. Days turned into weeks. Emily's drawings changed. No more cars sinking into water or lonely stick figures. Now there were bright suns, gardens, and 3 smiling faces, her father, her teddy bear, and Ruth. Each time she finished a picture, she would run to her father's office, place it on his desk, and whisper, "See?" And every time, Richard Hale would stop whatever he was doing to look, really look. One evening, Ruth walked past Emily's open door. The girl sat cross-legged, sketching with her crayons, humming softly. Her voice, still small, still shaky, carried through the hall like music. Ruth paused at the doorway, smiling. "That's a beautiful song, sweetheart." "What's it called?" Emily looked up with a grin that could melt the hardest heart. "Mommy's song," she said. Ruth nodded, swallowing a lump in her throat. "It's perfect." As she walked away, she glanced back one last time. Emily's laughter filled the room, bright and alive. The same child who once hid in silence had finally found her voice. And all it took was someone who cared enough to listen. If stories like this remind you that kindness speaks louder than wealth, hit like and subscribe so you never miss the next story, where compassion breaks walls and hearts find their way back to what truly matters.